and all the staff for having enabled me to participate in this event that is a precious and a rich event for the one like me who work in these Italian contexts where the subjects are important, and the debate is still young in comparison concerning some subjects we have talked about yesterday. Today we are going to talk about the African heritage preserved in Italy and Europe, and I'm very happy to open this panel: heritage and museum, musealization, conservation, digital, restoration, research, study, and cataloging. Many keywords that resonate with my professional experience. I am a cultural anthropology with experience in Africa countries, and I've been working in the museum management system in Turin, working above all with the non-European collections preserved in the university and also in other public institutions of Turin. My research work concerns those who are considered the biographies of the objects and collections, above all the African ones that are present in the storages of the museums and on the exhibitions of the Museum of Piemonte and of universities. I have been working the last few years in creating a basis of work for the Anthropology Museum of the university so that we can study and go into details concerning the provenance of the collections to look ahead in order to find a dialogue and collaboration for the diaspora communities. This is the first part of a long-lasting travel, and that is complex and that can and has to come back to the source communities from which the African heritage with which I work comes from. So just to conclude, we are exploring these subjects and we are doing it, going into details with the working group ICOM concerning the provenance and ICOM Italy that I represent with Sofia today. The working group was born a few months ago, and it is a precious space where professionals from different Italian museums and researchers, scholars, and also PhD students and older researchers have the possibility to exchange views and good practices with the main goal of contribute to the Italian debate and European debate, but also with the goal of developing guidelines that are essential that are able to lead our work concerning the provenance with a decolonialization view. Concerning our panel, we will talk about some subjects concerning provenance, but also justice, reparation, and also preservation and accessibility. The three panel discussions of this morning are very interesting in this way because they show how in different ways they different cultural heritages need to be considered in their nature of being intangible, and we also have to think about the tactics we have to use for the preservation of the objects in the museum, but also in their intangibility. So, as we said yesterday, we have to think about the memories of the objects, and the presentations will recall human remains, music, and fashion. And all the case studies are different one from another, but they see and they show how the phenomena are linked, and they need sensitive reflections concerning the history of the museum and of the cultural heritage, but also of the memories of the communities. The new technologies and the digitalization are the core in order to redefine old practices and to rethink them.
Before, I forgot to mention that we're going to leave questions for the end of the panel after all the presentations. Now I would like to give the floor to Jérinon, who has been working for the studies in music. He works in the African Museum of Tervuren, and he works on the music collections of the Central Africa. He pays great attention to the use of digital technologies for the dissemination and promotion of traditional music. The floor is yours. Thank you, Erica.
All the committees of ICOM and all the people present here for having me today and listening to me on this early morning. So, in 2021 and 2023, the Kenyan sound artist Kamaru conducted his artistic research at the African Museum, consulting in Sound Archive. His research resulted in the creation of two works entitled Temporary Store 1 and 2. His critical approach raises questions about the accessibility, reappropriation, and the reappropriation of sound archives, contexting them with the history of colonial violence. The African Museum Sounds Library contains recording of musical traditions and oral narrative from African societies. It's then necessary to address the issue of ownership, access, reuse condition in a way that respects the rights of the people to whom this heritage belongs. The management of Sound Archive was also anthropological, legal, and political issue that do not have obvious practical solutions. The legal framework surrounding these ethical and political issues invites us to reflect on our archiving methods and more broadly on the role and place of musicology within the museum with colonial origin. So we heard a lot about the African Museum. Here we have some numbers. I have to say that the Africa Museum originated from the colonial section of the 1897 Brussels World Fair, after King Leopold II decided to relocate it to a new building called le Palais des Colonies in Tervuren. The museum was conceived as a propaganda tool to promote its colonial project with the aim of attracting investors and gaining a popular support from the Belgian people. And it was a success. This fair attracting over 1 million visitors, that was a third of the whole Belgian population at the time. But it also caused the death of 7 Congolese people being there for the exhibition. This temporary exhibition became to be the first permanent museum from Congo and Belgium the year after. And from the beginning, the institution has served as both a museum and a scientific research center. Over the past century, museum staff and collaborators have recorded a wide variety of music from Central Africa. Initially, the focus was on collecting musical form and associated objects. Today, the emphasis is on studying how musical practices have transformed in response to some significant changes as new technologies or community engagement. The so-called ethnomusicology was established as a scientific field within the museum in 1966. The Sound Library contains a total of more than 3,000 hours of music, with the oldest recording dated back to 1910. The Sound Archive contains some unpublished first-hand collection, it's about 40% roughly, as well as edited recordings published by record labels. It's 60% of the collection, are LP, CD that were found on the market. The first project to digitize the Sound Archive with a focus on preservation and metadata was the DECMA project. Digitalisatie van de Koninklijk van de Ethnomusicalies. I'll let you read there. Sorry, I didn't speak. So this project started in 2003. It took 5 years. At this time, there was an urgent need to prevent the physical deterioration of the oldest media. The project has resulted in the creation of an online database that makes exploring the Sound Archive much easier. However, due to technical and copyright issues, access to the recording has not been yet granted. Since 2020, a reproduction request form was introduced to regulate access to Sound Archives. This has clearly proved to be an obstacle for users wishing to consult the recording. Indeed, access to Sound Archive involves balancing two conflict interests. In one hand, there is a growing demand for accessibility, particularly in the light of the development of open science and the decolonization of knowledge. On the other hand, there is a need to control access in order to ensure compliance with the intellectual property right. The DECMA project, the platform, was developed more than 20 years ago, and reached its limits. It works as an inventory, still the work that I'm using still today, but does not facilitate the scientific management required to meet the current needs. Today, to increase accessibility, all digital items should be centralized on one open access platform, aligning with the care and fair principle management. This principle should ensure that the collections are managed, documented, and shared in a way that respects scientific standards and ethical responsibilities. That's why we are currently working on a new platform called B-Music. The name can change. And the B-Music project aims to provide a digital access to musical instrument collection, Sound Archive, photographs, and field notes from the African Museum, but also from the Music Instrument Museum in Brussels, bringing them together on a new discovery platform. This platform will also offer the possibility of integrating primary source material from civilian experts. But the first step in managing the IPR is to develop a protocol for identifying right orders. This process involves identifying individuals, such as performers and collectors, as well as producing organizations such as labels and cultural institutions. It's so very important to know the dates of recording and publication, which are used to calculate the length of the neighboring right or the mechanical right. But identification is a very time-consuming activity, and names are often not provided. And I would like to thank you here, all the volunteers that joined us the last year in this project to try to identify the names. You should see Frank enjoying the picture, but there was 3 more. The lack of information on cultural context represent a significant challenge when it comes to managing ethical issues. We are therefore trying to develop some partnership with African cultural institutions, university, museum, in a view to working together on ethnographic research, collective listening session, and collaboration with communities/societies/people. I hope everybody is. Regarding unpublished archives and missing names, we'll use the legal category of orphan works, defined as the works whose author names are unknown or cannot be found, even after diligent search. Classifying this work as orphan works will allow us to share them online despite the lack of author information. However, this classification could not be definitive, and a right order must be found. On the slide, you can see the screenshot at the bottom of the very first sound recording that we had at the European database. We have listed the Armoire as the collector and therefore the legal producer of the recording, but the Bobatic Group as the cultural owner and bearer. This is not a legal value, but it recognizes at least the community ownerships, and it allows us to skip the limitation of the current European law. It's also important to highlight the difficulty that communities, societies, people, particularly those in rural areas, face in accessing continuous internet connection. But who use the Sans archives? Mostly researchers. They are used for research projects, such as this one that's currently ongoing called Resourcing. The project involves studying a collection of xylophones from different cultural origin, construction, and sounds. And the project, we're developing a website that facilitates a decentralized approach to co-creation and participatory creative action. And now I invite you to all scan the QR code. This is the fun moment of the day. Like this, you can scan it. You scan the QR code, you can play the instrument using an interactive virtual keyboards and download the sound sample for your whole musical project. We have a small discussion about it after. Of course, artists use also the Sound archives. Since 2008, the African Museum has offered residencies to Central African artists to study, work on, and with the collection. The residency lasts between 1 and 3 months and involves research relating to the collection or the work of the museum. The relationship between artists and the Sound archive is multiple, but few artists have truly used the historical sources, the sound file in this case, as the basis for the creating art. And more recently, an interest growing to the student. As part of the new international program at the Lucas School of Art in Brussels, students were invited to explore the use of archived audio materials. And they're encouraged to visit the African Museum and use the sound for its archive to create a video exercise. And I want to conclude my presentation with feedback of a very recent program, share program, an attempt to share African Sound archive with the African authorities. So as part of the so-called share program, in 2021, the African Museum transferred 4,000 musical recordings of Rwandan musical tradition from its collection to the Rwanda Cultural Heritage Academy, named the Ineko Yumucho. As you can see in the picture, a ceremony was held at the Rwanda Art Museum in Kigali, where the Belgian ambassador to Rwanda, Bert Vermeulen, handed over a hard drive containing a copy of this musical heritage to the Academy General Director, Robert Massosera. There were 2 big parts in this project, in the musical project. One was sharing the Sound archive. The other one was creating a new Sound archive. But there was a but. From the beginning, there was a big issue regarding the metadata accompanying the Sound archive. The Rwandan musical archive from the African Museum were mostly collected in the second half of the 20th century, at a time when the ethnic ideology was a social reality that led to the 1994 genocide. References to ethnic groups, as they were understood before the genocide, are present in Sound archive and in the metadata. As you can listen, when we sit at the table with the colleagues.
Rwanda, chant de jeune fille Bahutu, jeune fille de l'île Mazane.
It was the very first recording, and just that mention Hutu was enough to stop the sharing this whole, the public in the country. That's why the Ineko Yumucho addresses this issue by selecting and reading the Sound archive. That is a big impact in the limitation of the sharing. So now I will invite you to watch a video that was created. It was created at the end of the project that I consider as a fail, but it was created to raise public awareness on the shared heritage. It will be posted on the Ineko Yumucho YouTube channel and shared on the African Museum and MIM Facebook pages.
Par le projet Cher, on a acquis beaucoup de connaissances concernant la prise des images audiovisuelles. On a travaillé sur beaucoup de projets dans les 2 années passées. On a enregistré la troupe Urugangazi. On a enregistré les jeunes joueurs des instruments traditionnels comme Théo Mouchavizi. Et il y a les autres vieux chanteurs qui utilisent les instruments traditionnels. On a enregistré leurs sons pour que les futurs Rwandais qui vont venir dans les années prochaines, ils vont voir les archives. Aujourd'hui, on est en train de construire un site web pour qu'il soit intégré avec notre site web de l'Académie. On va sauvegarder ces archives, ces vidéos, ces audios pour que tout les Rwandais et les autres personnes peuvent en avoir accès. Ils peuvent aussi se référer sur les archives sonores que nous avons aussi pour faire la comparaison avec les années passées pour voir s'il y a une différence ou bien une continuité à propos des sons et aussi à propos de la qualité ou bien du contenu des chansons passées et des chansons d'aujourd'hui.
On a commencé à rencontrer quelques artistes très intéressés et on les a donné quelques éléments des archives sonores et ils ont déjà commencé à les utiliser en s'inspirant de l'héritage déjà dit. Parmi d'autres artistes, on a une troupe de danse qui s'appelle Ugangazi, qui a commencé à utiliser les archives sonores, mais aussi un artiste talentueux, Makembe, qui les touche, qui les utilise, qui mélange des sons, des archives sonores avec les instruments modernes, avec la production des studios modernes.
My work, usually I do music archiving of Rwanda, and I've been touring Rwanda since 2018. The idea was to bring vocals in my studios, to bring those instruments, to bring audios that I recorded on the set, just to sample them, to bring them in a new rhythm, new style. Through my journey of recording traditional musicians, I go out with my microphone on the set and I put together people in a certain village, in a certain place in Rwanda, and they give me what I call their blues. So how I approached like a certain community, I just go in a village, spend there 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, connect with people, study their culture, study their spirit. I introduce them to what I do. I make them listen to my work, to my songs. I tell them my vision that I'm recording traditional musicians. And the reason why I came to them is to study and also to bring the information they give me, the knowledge that they give me. I want to spread it to other people. I learn from the archives. I go do research from the archive. Those archives have changed my life because they have fed me information. They have given me a knowledge. My generation nowadays, everybody's connected to hip hop. I wanted to include those cultures together. That's like hip hop. My generation can just, any rapper could just fit in the music, but to me, the original sound, the identity of this music, it comes when I hear my traditional vocals, and I keep the tradition original and the hip hop the way it should be, just to bring the fusion alive. We can still learn from the ancestors. We can still get the knowledge from the ancestors, but just spread it to our own language too.
And the Sans Archive was not shared with the public. So what next? Oh, sorry. In June 2024, Bartol Vrie, the new director of Africa Museum, traveled to Rwanda, visit most of the museum in Kigali and Butare, and meet Robert Mazozel, the director of the museum in Rwanda. Both of them agreed to establish a new bilateral treaty and a scientific commission to draw up a MOU for sharing the Africa Museum archive via hard disk. So we'll repeat again and again the same story. I want to conclude to mention that there is some initiative in Rwanda concerning the restitution of intangible archive, and workshops are being organized around this initiative. 2 weeks ago, the edition September addresses, and I quote the founder, Elisha Clever, one of the most urgent and contentious issues of our time, restitution to repatriation. Who owns African heritage in a digital world? Question mark. The event brought together elders, young people, cultural practitioners, and academics to reflect on Rwandan cultural heritage. Inspiring discussion and restitution and digital preservation sparked deep emotion and reflection, as well as a commitment to action. So, in the answer to the question, who owns the Sans Archive? I would say that there are multiple possible responses, and the answer lies between the law and the ethics. Access to Sans Archive remains a subject of ongoing debate, and there is no single best practice that fits all situations. Thank you.
Thank you. We can now move on to the last presentation with Monica Teton, senior scientist at the University of Vienna, where she teaches fashion history and where she carries out research on fashion, style, and how they intertwine with the Italian colonialist history. Her presentation focuses on the colonial fashion in the archive, object biographies, and the musealization of fashion artifacts from Eritrea. So the floor is yours.
Research on the colonial archives of Italian fashion, focusing on 3 objects from Italy's former colonial museum. For the past 3 years, I have explored how fashion, craft, and colonialism became entangled in Italy during the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. Scholarship on fashion under fascism and on Italian colonialism is substantial, yet their intersection remains little studied. This gap exists because most research has emphasized fashion's role within fascism or focused on visual representations, while the material culture of colonialism has received far less attention. Often, the traces have been concealed or overlooked. My project attempts to address this absence by examining the material culture of Italian, Ethiopian, Somali, Libyan, and Eritrean fashion and crafts. A veritable turning point, and I can't stress this enough, in my research project came with the discovery of artifacts at the Museo delle Civiltà. Encountering these objects led me to adopt an object-based approach, reconstructing provenance and object biographies. They guided my further archival research and provided the framework for the ongoing study I will present today. Time does not permit a full institutional history of Italy's former colonial museum, especially with the esteemed director of the Museo delle Civiltà, Andrea Vigliani, present, and a guided museum tour scheduled on Saturday. I will therefore summarize only briefly. The Museo Coloniale was founded in Rome in 1923, inspired by institutions in Leiden, Tervuren, and Paris. While it housed varied ethnographic, botanical, zoological, and military collections, its core was the Mostra Campionaria Permanente, a traveling trade exhibition of raw and finished goods from Libya, Eritrea, Somalia, Ethiopia, and Italy. Textiles, garments, leather accessories, beads, jewelry, etc., made by Italian and African artisans. This trade exhibition predated the museum, circulating widely at national and later internationally since the 1890s until the 1960s. It pursued three goals: cultivating a colonial consciousness in Italians, displaying Italy's conquests abroad in line with other empires, and advertising the colony's commercial potential. Exhibitions of this kind, racist and exoticizing, were powerful propaganda, particularly in Italy, where illiteracy was high. After their dispersal, the collections were reunited in 2010 at the Museo delle Civiltà, where since 2022, under the directorship of Mr. Vigliani, they have been re-evaluated in a decolonial lens. And it's in this context, in 2024, that I was granted access with the guidance of in-house experts Anna Rosa Rilella and Gaia Del Pino. As Pierre Bourdieu and Yvette Delceau argued in Le Couturier et sa griffe, branding in fashion works as a form of magic, conferring value on otherwise ordinary objects, much like an artist's signature. Whereas fashion reinforces this symbolic power through logos, despite mass production, art still privileges singularity. When fashion enters the museum, serial items likewise become singular, but they remain fashion, not art, nor ethnographic objects, and must be analyzed as such. As Nancy Troy observes, the label operates in a paradoxical way. It implies presence, yet reveals absence, signaling what Derrida calls the absolute singularity of the signature event, while remaining reproducible insofar as every signature must resemble the others. In this light, the label embodies the contradictory tensions between originality and reproduction that structure fashion in general, and the rise of early 20th century haute couture in particular. It is with these thoughts in mind that I selected three objects from Italy's former colonial museum, precisely because they still carried labels. The first is a leopard coat, a leopard fur coat I encountered during my initial visit at the Museo delle Civiltà's deposit. With its matching cuffs and collar, the coat bore a furrier's label, Ditta de Marchi Torino, and a tag marked Leopardo Eritreo, Eritrean leopard, once displayed in colonial exhibitions. This ensemble exemplifies the environmental and economic impact of colonial fashion. Leopard fur was both a rare luxury and a product of extraction. Archival material from Italian fashion magazines confirms the presence of leopard fur within the visual and material language of the period. For instance, the January 1941 issue of Bellezza features a jacket with leopard cuffs and belt details. The explicit mention of Somali provenance directly ties the garment to Italy's colonial holdings and attests to leopard fur's widespread circulation at the time. The coat thus became a polyvalent signifier of exoticism and opulence in Europe, and within the Harlem Renaissance, of reclaimed African heritage. With colonial objects in particular, it is essential to consider how the regional and the global are interwoven, and to trace the continuation of these trajectories across post-colonial iterations. Leopard skin exemplifies this complexity. It has a concrete material history, rooted in colonial extraction and trade, its circulation as a modernist wardrobe staple, and its transformation into the ubiquitous leopard print in contemporary fashion. To trace these trajectories, I created an archival box, extending academic research into artistic practice. Bringing together magazines, photographs, and animal print textiles, the box made visible the colonial roots of leopard skin in modern fashion. Juxtaposing these fragments underscored both the colonial entanglements of materials and the embodied, often serendipitous process of archival work. Nedima Dafar crafted a handmade silver silk brocade vest, lined with coral taffeta silk, embroidered at the collar and fastened with 2 rows of fabric-covered buttons. Identified as a bridal farmula, a misspelling of farmla, it bears a handwritten tag with her name on it and notes its production at the School of Work Education for Muslim pupils in Tripoli. Founded in 1898 under Ottoman rule, the school combined shelter with vocational training for disadvantaged Arab and Jewish girls, partly funded through workshop sales. After Italy's 1911 occupation, its mission shifted. Theoretical education was curtailed and practical training emphasized for colonial exploitation. This illustrates the racist logic of Italian colonial rule shared by other empires' vocational schools. This hierarchy between traditional colonial crafts and metropolitan fashion echoes Victoria Rovine's theorization of the traditional and modern divide in fashion. The vest, hand-sewn with exceptional artisanal skill, is comparable to a Poiret gown, yet denied equal recognition. It prompts us to ask whether Nedima Dafar's name reveals further traces of her work. With access to Libyan archives restricted, I turned to Bosa, Sardinia, home of the now closed Pinacoteca Melchiorre Melis. Melis, a painter and ceramicist, directed the Tripoli school between 1934 and 1941, introducing ceramics. Archival fragments show he used Mediterranean reference materials for teaching and later pursued a universal Mediterranean craft language. These holdings are now locked in storage, underscoring the precarity of colonial archives. In June 2025, I revisited Dafar's vest in a group exhibition in Marseille, organized by the Fonds Dotation Maison Mode Méditerranée, which also supports my research. Asked to contribute a tangible object that illustrates my research, I developed the speculative branding project Maison Nedima Dafar Tripoli. Centered on this bridal vest, one of the very few objects in the Colonial Museum's archives bearing the name of an African artisan. The project reintroduced Dafar as a designer within fashion's history's narrative. By appropriating the logic of branding, Maison Nedima Dafar functions as an anti-brand, not a historical fashion house, but a conceptual site for thinking with the anonymous laborers and designers excluded from fashion and design history. It posits branding as a speculative practice of re-inscription, where authorship becomes collective memory work. Through this gesture, I sought to challenge the anthropological gaze that objectifies colonial artifacts, experimenting with creative practice as a decolonial method within fashion research. Meanwhile, the artifacts from the former Colonial Museum continue their itinerary as traveling objects. This photograph shows some of them within Christoph Büchel's formidable 2024 exhibition Monte di Pietà at Fondazione Prada in Venice. Spread across 3 floors and more than 20 chambers, Büchel created a labyrinth of thousands of objects in a multi-layered survey of debt, value, and credit in the history of capitalism. The sudden reappearance of these fashion objects, among the hundreds of artifacts on loan from Rome's Museo delle Civiltà, after decades in storage, within an exhibition on debt, was no coincidence. Büchel exposed how colonial extraction underpins systems of value and exchange, reminding me that these artifacts are not inert remnants, but circulating actors, and pushing me to see visuality not as illustration, but as an epistemological stance, a way of producing knowledge and opening decolonial pathways in fashion scholarship. One such artifact was the dark blue linen-bound dye pattern book produced by the Swiss company J.R. Geigy S.A. It illustrates the dyeing properties of animal and plant fibers from the Italian colonies. Divided by materials such as wool, sisal, and cotton, the book pairs scientific descriptions of each fiber and its potential uses with lists of dyes tested, alongside vivid fabric samples and undyed controls. Unlike leatherwork, which drew on existing expertise in Italy and its colonies, the Geigy book reveals broader ambitions for industrial-scale colonial extraction. Following Italy's 1935 invasion of Ethiopia, the League of Nations condemned the aggression and imposed sanctions, including arms embargoes, suspended loans, and a ban on imports. In response, Mussolini proclaimed economic autarky, urging industries, including textiles and fashion, to source materials from Italy and its African colonies. While textiles briefly benefited from colonial resources, the sector never rivaled its British or French counterparts. Crops from the colonies failed to produce sufficient quantities, leaving Italy dependent on imports, and the raw materials were of poor quality. The sample book highlights these limitations. The cotton, though spinnable, was of short fiber and best blended with American cotton. Other fibers yielded equally disappointing results. Taken together, the three artifacts I analyzed, the leopard fur ensemble, Nedima Dafa's silver brocade vest, and the Geigy sample book, reveal the layered colonial histories within Italy's former colonial museum and the entanglements of fashion with the geopolitics and economies of empire. They trace intersecting trajectories: Tripoli's Ottoman legacy of artisanal education, Italy's unrealized ambitions for colonial extraction, exemplified by Geigy, and the ecological and symbolic dimensions of empire condensed in the leopard coat, whose legacy persists in the enduring presence of the leopard motif within fashion design. In closing, I return to the museum, the site where these objects circulate today. Their reappearance, whether in storage in exhibitions like Monte di Pietà or in artistic research projects, underscores the crucial role of museums as custodians, recontextualizers, and decolonizers of colonial collections. These case studies show how object-based, provenance-driven research can disrupt canonical narratives and expose the unstable boundaries between craft, design, artisanship, and fashion, categories further unsettled by their entanglement with colonial projects. Engaging these artifacts not as passive relics of the past, but as active participants in the present, makes provenance research, identifying, tracing, contextualizing, a critical step towards reassessing museum narratives. In this sense, museums can become dynamic repositories where suppressed histories surface and knowledge is co-produced, opening the way toward a decolonized history of fashion, design, and cultural heritage. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We have just a few minutes for questions, but we will have more time later in the afternoon to discuss in a deeper way the themes and topics we addressed this morning. I have one question for all of you, and I
all of you talked about and somehow different desires and different memories and also different actors that potentially met or will meet in the archives on the museum. And since the museum and archives are also spaces of friction and also of contacts, I would like to ask if in your work as a researchers and museologist, you have encountered or clashed with different stakeholders or actors with different desire, and how these have influenced your research work. And so that is the first question. We can collect other one. Okay, there. I don't know, il microfono? The microphone?
Thank you. Thanks for 3 very rich and interesting presentations. My question is actually also for all 3 of you, and kind of thinking about the larger themes of this conference. I was wondering if you have each individually thought about your own positionality in the work that you do and what it means to be non-African, white presenting people in this space. Thanks.
Please. Yes.
Merci. Je vais intervenir sur un point qui a été abordé par...
I'm going to talk about what our friend said. So the what is focused on the cultural heritage, and the restitution is quite important. So I think that so I would like to ask you, how can this cultural heritage belonging to a specific community be managed? Because in reality, there are communities that take advantage of them. So we have an heritage that belongs to a specific community. So this is my question.
Merci.
Thank you. I would like to ask a question to Remy for what concerns the same logic as Jean-Paul's question. I know that the Musée de Lorraine is working on the restitution of material coming from Congo. So between the 1970s and the 1990s, the museum had collected musical recordings. And as things stand, the Museum of Lorraine has used some of these musical data to transpose them. So have you dealt with problems from the communities that have produced this traditional music? And we are living in a period where people want to have their intellectual rights recognized. Are you aware of them? How have you managed the rights of intellectual property? And my second question is for Marion. You have talked about human remains and Mumba in particular. And I have a feeling that the issue of Lumumba remains has not been considered in the same manners as the remains of the colonial period, because the path for the Lumumba has been political rather than cultural. So I would like to ask you why. Because the National Commission for the Restitution of Human Remains was created in 2023, but the remains of Mumba arrived in 2022. So are these specific arrangements between the government of the committee and Mumba's family? So what is the situation? Was it a political restitution, or were there problems dating back to the colonial period?
We have just 2 minutes. Okay.
First, just to correct the translator, his name is Patrice Lumumba, not Mumba. Second, I would like to start with Monica. Thank you very much for your presentation. As you mentioned, there were quite a number of leopard skins that were extracted from the Italian colonies. Has there been any effort to help repopulate the leopard population in those colonies? Two, for Remy, thank you for recognizing that sharing is scaring. The digital space is really uncharted territory for us right now in terms of heritage and the archives. Third, for Marion, as you rightly said, there is a need for, and you are treating human remains with as much human dignity as possible. In modern day science, when we are going to use a human body for science, they have to have consented to their bodies being used for research. Who then is giving the consent for the human remains being used for scientific research, especially since they were taken a very long time ago? Thank you very much.
Any other question? No. Okay. Please.
Shall I start?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe I will answer to all the question about friction, all the other questions. First of all, I want to reply to Eva about my positionality. Of course, being a white guy, working for the African Museum, I have a very duty weight on my shoulder when I'm traveling and I'm not representing myself, first of all, I'm representing the whole colonization, even there from my institution. So it's really adds some weight in the unbalanced relationship that we can have, of course. But my idea is not to talk about poor people in the place. The idea is just to provide access in that really case. And of course, there's an idea now it comes when you want to build a new archive in all the narrative. What kind of media do we select? And then we have kind of friction. And I will continue maybe for the question of Jean-Paul. It was again. Could you? Okay. I don't remember the question, Jean-Paul. Could you repeat your question, please? Je vais d'abord répondre à Placide. Bon, bien évidemment, la question du droit d'auteur, elle est très très large, et surtout quand on s'intéresse aux musiques.
The question is quite wide, especially if we talk about tradition music. And concerning intellectual property rights. These are quite controversial issues because we also deal with mechanical rights, because you push the red button and you start recording. And there's a great difference between an audio recording and a picture, because I can change the name in a recording, but a picture can be used in a family context. And I think the same applies to intellectual property. Intellectual property rights are always complied with, even in case of inequalities. So it is extremely important to protect the rights of composers, musicians, especially in case of traditional music. Communities do not appreciate this aspect sometimes. Even from an economic perspective, I think that you cannot pay for culture, especially when you deal with these audio recordings. Therefore, for what concerns digital colonization, we have something different to deal with. For example, we produced 10 CDs to give value to these recordings made in partnership with the Music Institute of Congo. It's more than 10 hours music that haven't been enhanced, fostered yet, and that have to be shared. For what concerns the intellectual rights property and the number of sales of these CDs, we have approximately 3,000 CDs and we sold only 100 of them. We're not very good at selling them, actually. The artist earned 38 euros, so a very low amount, very little money, basically. And what we tried to do with our lawyers presented. So we worked with a lawyer in Brussels in order to enable the artist to earn 800 euros. So thanks to the court, at the end of the hearing, he managed to earn 4,000 euros out of the sale of these CDs. Of course, he had to bear some specific costs, especially for the lawyer, but I know that we will also have to deal with intellectual property in case of translators, because we have to ensure security. So we can record some music that can be considered as a manifesto. So some companies do not accept these principles, but for what concerns the intellectual property right, we also have to consider moral rights. So when we talk about intellectual property rights, we have to keep in mind that most of the recordings were not easy in terms of intellectual property rights. I'm sorry if my answer took too long, but in my opinion, I think we should intertwine in the moral rights with intellectual property rights. So
the question of my own positionality. I am not from Belgium. I am not from Congo, of course. And I think that in this field, one of the the main thing that I try to keep is humility. There are some few things that I will never feel as a European, that I had never experienced as a French woman and not an African woman. So humility is one of the things that I try to keep in mind. Regarding museums as zones of conflicts and frictions, this is part of the project Remaniement to study. It is one of the core aspects to study those negotiations, be there frictions and conflicts. So it is really one of the key challenges. Thank you, Placid, for also pointing out the different cases regarding Patrice Lumumba and the political issues behind this repatriation that is, of course, different from other colonial collections, and that was not considered in the same way. But yeah, I think the political issues is at the core of all the repatriation, the way repatriation is dealt today in Belgium, and how it is now also lack of abandoned in a certain way. And last question regarding consent. This is, for me, it is really one of the key questions regarding the current pregnant research that are currently undertaken. Who can give access and give the possibility to conduct research or not, when we don't know neither the identity of the people in the collections and nor the communities of origin. For me, it is at the core of how we do provenance research today, and it is really a question that I would like to open to the floor, and not only to myself, because I think it is something to discuss all together. And thank you for raising this.
Now it's my turn. I start with Erika. Thank you for your question. So with this research in particular, I always said I'm interested in fashion. I somehow keep the colonial interest out of focus because I know that then I'm perceived as just like a person interested in aesthetics. So I concealed openly my research interest to gain access, sneaky as I am, which was mostly successful and gave me access to archives probably that wouldn't have granted me archives if I had declared my intentions in advance. I traveled to Basel to find the archives of the Geigy company. Basel is the big pharmaceutical city in Switzerland, and the Geigy archives are held in the archives of a big pharmaceutical company. I went to their archives, and there the archivist showed me a wall, a full room full of archival materials and full of these sample books. And she said to me, I suffer from vertigo. I can't reach the upper shelf of this archival shelf to give you access to the books. And then I said, well, isn't there anybody else? And she said, no, and they're also not really cataloged, so we don't know. What did I do? I spent 2 days sifting through other archival material from Geigy, from the company Milan that was established and hired by the Italian government, I suppose, to make these tests in the Italian colonies. But this was all under strict surveillance of the archivist, and I think they overloaded me with, 20 archival folders, but they didn't want to give me access to the actual material that I traveled there for. I would consider this a kind of hidden conflict, a very Swiss diplomatic way of not giving access to. And I still, it's okay. I attempted what I could. Thank you, Caroline, also for the question about the repopulation of leopards. No, as far to my knowledge, there was no attempt by anybody in Italy to do this. Also because there's a true amnesia regarding the colonial past in Italy, especially fashion's colonial past. I bet if we went to Fendi, the headquarters of a big furrier company who is in air close to Mr. Vigliani's Museo del Civiltà, I'm sure that there's lots of exotic skins in their archives, and they could be actually asked to contribute to these efforts. Thank you also to addressing the positionality, my own positionality in this research. My maternal grandfather fought in the Ethiopian War, and I discovered a family photo album, just like JC told a story that she discovered a photograph of her grandfather. I did so too. I see this more as my responsibility to address this shared history, which is mine just as much as an African history. So this is the positionality I bring into this kind of research, to readdress gaps and to add hidden chapters and to use my own privilege also in accessing these archives with this strategy of hiding and pretending to be looking just for like garments to do this kind of research. That's kind of my answer. But thank you for addressing it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We have to close. And okay, thank you to the authors and also to the public. It has been amazing. And I think there is the coffee break.
Yeah, at least just 10 minutes. So we kindly ask you to come back here in 10 minutes. Thank you.
So good morning once again. I'm Lana Karaya, the board member of ICOM Europe and chair of ICOM Georgia, and it's my pleasure to present this panel. So our conference explores heritage museums and collections with a focus of how professionals from Africa and Europe can share knowledge and skills in addressing both historical legacies and contemporary challenges. So this panel will continue the dialogue by reflecting on how museums are rethinking their collections and display in light of colonial histories, and how new curatorial and participatory practices are shaping the ways we engage the heritage today. It's my pleasure to present the first speaker, Andrea Vigliani, who's a critic, curator, and historian of contemporary arts and culture. Since 2022, he has been the director of the Museo della Civiltà in Rome, and one of Italy's most important national museums, which brings together diverse collections spanning from prehistory to early Middle Age, Italian folk arts, and non-European cultures, as well as archives of Italian colonial history. Before this role, he served as a head and curator of the Castello di Rivoli Research Center, director of Madre Museum in Naples, director of Fondazione Galleria Civica in Trento, and curator of the Mambo, Museum of Modern Art in Bologna. His curatorial experience also includes international projects such as the Biennial de Lyon and Documenta 13, where he co-curated the Afghan section. Alongside his institutional leadership, he has published widely and contributes regularly to scholarly and cultural journals. In his talk, Decolonizing a Museum Through Not Against Its Heritage, Historical Past, Critical Present and Hypothetical Future of the Museum of Civilizations, he will discuss how the museum is rethinking its collections and narratives in light of colonial histories. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome you on the stage, and the floor is yours. Yeah.
Okay, now a little bit of whatever. Hello, thank you so much for inviting me, ICOM and Professor Sericani. Thank you so much. So my talk will be bilingual. Sometimes I use English and sometimes my spaghetti English, and sometimes I will talk in Italian. I start in Italian, but I know that there are translations. Ho deciso di intitolare.
I decided to name this speech Decolonizing a Museum through and not against its heritage. After I talked with Dabashego, writer, pedagogist, and activist of Italy, of whose family is from Somalia. She dedicated a chapter of the book named Cassandra a Mogadishu to the Museum of Civilizations, and this chapter is within the book, the core of it, and it's called Intermezzo Coloniale. And it is dedicated to the Museum of Civilizations, that is an institution that is living, as the name say, a colonial interlude. The Museum of Civilizations, and I will not go into details because tomorrow we will be together in order to visit in the morning from 10 to 13. It is the National Italian Museum dedicated to 6 different previous museums that in different times were opened and in different time closed. Amongst these 6 museums, there is, as we said before, the museum, the former Colonial Museum of Rome, created by Mussolini as colonial museum. And this period, that period of the creation is important because it has been closed in 1971, and as I was saying before to some of you, it was missing. There are different types of works of art, documents, very precious documents that are here, for example, in the National Central Library of Rome, and the rest of the works of art has been closed in some boxes and forgotten for more than 50 years. The Museum of Civilization received these boxes without the archives and the other things I told you in 2017. And nowadays we have the financing for the re-exhibition of these works of art, artifacts, testimonies, and we are pretty ready to say that we are going to reopen. What are we going to do? Are we going to reopen a colonial museum or something that is not colonial or not museum? This is why I want to say what Bashedu told us. By going to the storage museum, that is an active and critical part of the museum, Ijaba had outstanding meat. He saw a painting where a woman from Somalia is using a noodle, a comb, and also saw that there were some examples of these combs in the archives. This comb, it is the one that are used in Somalia by the mothers for the daughters. And the mother, in that way, could tell the daughters the histories of their ancestors, of their community and civilizations. by passing orally something that was identified, something that identified them as a feminist, a member of a society, and why she was surprised, because this scam is not used anymore by mothers and daughters, and because in Somalia diaspora communities, these scams are not used anymore. That tradition risks to be extinguished by the culture they have been created. And where do we have the testimonies of this small detail, of these private details of this great culture? In the closed colonial museum, outside the communities, the families, outside the memory, outside the possibility of passing the knowledges. This is why I thank her that maybe will be with us tomorrow. I thank her for having inspired this feeling before even this idea of having to work on a cultural heritage, and not against it, but through this heritage. And I am sorry for the to the anthropologists and art critics, but I will say that towards, through this collection, not against.
Go there, even if we are the custodians of these collections. For the very first time, I switched to English. For the very first time in my career as a museum director or curator, I know that I work, and I know since the beginning, when I applied for this position, to work in an unsafe environment, or as I wrote, in an alien territory. And while I think that all the museums should be at least a bit unsafe, this is very specific in the case of Museum of Civilizations, because this museum is built on historical contradictions and in future potentialities. The very first contradiction is his name, a contemporary anthropological museum devoted to war cultures, using a very, very, very Latin term like civilization, which means the culture of the citizens and of the city. And we know that many of the indigenous cultures that we are devoted to don't have the same concept of culture as something related to a city. So there are, as I have very few minutes more, there are some assumptions and premises that I would like to share with you. My idea is that we still don't know, in a museum like that, what we made, what we stole, what we wrote about, what we shown, what we preserve and study. Oh, by the way, you are going to see everything tomorrow. Edouard. Yeah. Thank you. Maybe I show just that. That's why I think that we should work in a museum like the Museum of Civilization through or even towards these collections. We need to test the ground that they shape in order to find a language and a working method. I know that museums should know what they do, but in this case, it could be better if they question themselves about what they do. We deal with methodological and hermeneutic ignorance, as well as, if not more than, with historical violence. We deal with subjects, first of all, not objects. We deal with obliterated ghosts, spirits, forces, broken taboos, much more than with just stolen forms and materials. They are the result of a massively destructive and at the same time self-destructive history. And as Mati Diop demonstrated to us in the amazing Dahomey film, these subjects that we manage, they are alien now to the original makers, to the modern appropriators, to the present and or future back home interpreters and custodians. We deal, Edouard, we deal with still alive, not extinct civilizations. And I assure you that many visitors think that visiting the African, American, Pacific Islands or Asian collection mean going to visit cultures that are archaeological, extinct, not alive anymore. And that's why, because I needed to defend this position so many times on the national press, that's why contemporariness, not contemporary art, I'm a contemporary historian, contemporariness of the highest quality is not a footnote, is not a pretension, but is a mandatory methodological and hermeneutic tool to not further misinterpret these collections. So we need to work beyond divisions that are quite stereotypical. Also in a country like Italy, where this kind of debate is recent, more recent than in other countries, we need to work beyond the divisions between art and anthropology. We need to imply not just the past, but the present economics and politics in looking at this collection. And I thank an artist that I also quoted, Sami Balogi, who is one of the research fellows at the museum. We need to work beyond the division between nature and culture, between history and ecology, because the history of indigenous culture is also the history of the climate change and the destruction of the environment. It's not just against cultures that we perpetrated violence, but it's also against the forest, the fields, the winds, the water. And I need to thank Maria Teresa Alves, who is going to install her own piece in the middle of the reunion of the American collection, and is about the destruction of the place that we call now Mexico City. We need to work against the division between architectures and forest, or archaeology and the contemporary archaeology that I propose to label digitalogy. We need to share practices, and we need a mutual understanding that is not just intellectual, is physical and sensible. That's why, and I thank the many reserve fellows helping us, we need form of healing, like working in an hospital and not in a cultural institution. We need to stop, sorry, this is a little bit politically incorrect, but we need to stop to just talk about property, because there are too many cases of restitutions that are made unilaterally as when these subjects are being stolen. There are many cases that I could refer, but I don't have time. So, to make a long story short, we need to celebrate, possibly, a matrimonio, which means a plural care, rather than a patrimonio, which means singular ownership in this kind of museum. So heritage is like prehistory, oriental, ethnography, a word that we are trying not to use anymore. And much of the work that we are doing now at the museum is to change the lexicon, change the grammar, change the language, in particular being a museum with this name, Civilizations. Which is okay, I cannot change the name of the museum. I can question. Okay. So the restitution is a reparation and not just a transfer of ownership. Restitution is not the end, but is a further beginning. And I would like to thank Clémentine Delis, was Metabolic Museum, Future Academy, are of course a terrain vague mark more than a landmark reference, but in particular I would like to thank Dan Nixon, Professor of Contemporary Archaeology at the School of Archaeology at Oxford University and Curator of World Archaeology at the Pitt Rivers Museum, for asking us to think about restitutions not as an end, but as a new beginning in this context. We face the responsibility of supporting entangled narratives and to support hypothetical platforms, to be redesigned beyond the museum's stereotypical schemes, platforms generated by a new generation of institutional stories tellers rather than storytellers. That groups directors, curators, artists, activists, citizens, as well as many and much welcome in this kind of post-museum entity, animal, mineral, vegetable, as well as spiritual agents. So we need to open the windows, open the door, open the archives, welcome people like you, and working together without being afraid of the possible results. Because the museum that result is maybe not anymore a museum. And I conclude saying that what we don't need anymore, and you know, people working in this kind of museums know what I mean. What we don't need anymore, and I thank again another external helper, Alessandra Ferrini, one of the contemporary Italian artists who's most committed to study the past, but as well as the contemporary Italian colonial story. What we don't need anymore in this context is good intentions. So no more good intentions, but stories told and actions shared in full. This means that I'm not pro any kind of cancel culture, any kind of wokenism, any kind of exaggeration, but I'm so pro about how terribly complex and terribly urgent is what we are doing now in one of the most beautiful contemporary museums, which is the Contemporary Anthropological Museum. And I need to thank this guy, Edouard Glissant, because Edouard Glissant, you know very well who Edouard Glissant is, inspired the name of the first attempt to not reopen a new colonial museum, because it was part of the, in 1959, of the first Congress, second Congress, World Congress of Writers and Artists, Black writers and artists, organized by the Istituto Italiano per l'Africa, which was the heir of the colonial collections in 1959, and he wrote that every man and every woman has the right, they have the right to be opaque, to be not transparent, to be more than something tiny and easily to understand. He wrote that we don't need to have an identity that is accepted. We need to self-define our identity, and our identity is complex. So we decided to label what we are doing with the colonial collection that we are going to visit it tomorrow, Museum of Opacities, which means two things, that these stories are opaque, complex, layered, there is no safe position, and that these stories are the result of a massive amnesia about Italian colonial history, because we cannot tell these stories without a museum, but the museum was closed for 50 years. And now ask young people, they don't know even that Italy was a colonial power. They don't know nothing about that in schools. So we need to work on a public opinion which is not aware of what we are discussing. As a public institution, we need to build an audience for this collection, even before them reinstalling properly this collection. That's something that I should not say, but is a candidate for the biggest restitution after the Obelisco di Axum. It's two paintings coming from the Addis Ababa Parliament. They are there in historic photographs here at the Biblioteca, but they are now in the collection of the Museum of Civilization, because in 1956 we didn't find them, so we didn't restitute. We restitute the others, but not these two ones. Of course, it's not the museum deciding what to restitute, but the museum is preparing the papers, conducting the research, and sharing the possible future for this collection, that maybe will not be anymore here in Italy, but they will go back to the Parliament of Addis Ababa. And it's not an end, it's a new beginning. As is a new beginning to receive 200,000 euros for our government, and I'm really grateful too, for buying a piece by Tio Eshetu, an Italo-Ethiopian artist who actually tells the stories of the restitution of the Obelisco di Axum, using the same visual grammar of typical Ethiopian traditional art. So, if one day this painting will go back to Ethiopia, we will have anyway this story told in the museum. So sharing means that it's not property, it's not where the piece is located, is to have the same story to tell in two different, for example, institutions. It is too long. It's too long, but you see tomorrow. Okay, this is an amazing thing that you are not seeing tomorrow, because there is an entire part of the future Museum of Opacities which is devoted to whiteness and to archaeology. Because as you know, when we invaded our colonies in Africa, we said, we are not invading, we are going back home because of the Roman Empire. And this lady, without a head and without the arms, is the symbol of this story, is the Venere of Cyrene. Venere of Cyrene was the symbol that we are not going to invade, we are going back home, because Venus from Cyrene, from the Roman Empire. The original has been restituted by Silvio Berlusconi to Muammar Gheddafi and has been, I don't know if destroyed, but is missing. This is the chalk replica that Benito Mussolini wanted at the beginning of the Colonial Museum, and is still at the Museum of Civilization, which means that copies, replicas, avatars, digital, and co-ownership is maybe an exit strategy. And it already was. Too long to explain? Well, this is about ecology and economy, which is a massive part of the collection, which is not about art, it's about how profitable was to have a colonial empire. Again, ciao. Oh, this is a beautiful project that most unfortunately you will not see tomorrow. It's called the Phono Museum Rome, and is about the Afro-descendenti communities in Italy that they are building their own museum inside of the colonial collections, telling stories about what coloniality, which means not historical colonialism, but the persistence of colonialism, means today for them. So something that it's contemporary, it's not historical, and this is one of the most important strategies in Museum of Opacities. Contemporariness is opening the door of the past museums to current contemporary people, in particular people that are from communities silenced, marginalized, obliterated, fully absent from the historical colonial museums. But they were Ethiopians, Somali, Libici. So why they were not there? We know why, but why should not be there now? So an ongoing coloniality museum. Too long, but it's something that we will see tomorrow. The second chapter of Museum of Opacity, because it's a story in many chapters. It's about agriculture and about infrastructure, the end of the end. Okay, so it's the end, indeed. And tomorrow we will see the pieces by Germain Michael Gabriel and the flag with blood of Generale Graziani. We will see the Ente di Decolonizzazione related to the Ente del Latifondo by Dar. And I salute Alessandro and Sandy, who are now in Palestine, because Sandy is Palestinian. Okay, that's something that I will tell tomorrow, but we are giving a prize for the colonial practices. And this is cooking sections, which is about colonial seeds. Every seed here is a colonial seed, and we consider this the analog of a ballet, because these seeds were really transforming in a dramatic way the landscape and the communities in Somalia, in this case. Thank you so much, and we will see, and we will discuss more about tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to ask the technical staff if Maria Figuera is online, because she's not here and she will present online. Can we check this? Oh, okay, great.
Hello.
Okay, the second speaker in this panel is Maria Figueira from Portugal. She is a PhD candidate in history and philosophy of science with a specialization in museology at the University of Évora, Portugal. She is a researcher on the project Transna, Transnational Materialities, Reconstituting Collections and Connecting Histories. Her work examines how colonial collections were constructed, circulated, and interpreted in Portuguese museums, with a particular focus on provenance research and the enduring impact of colonial epistemologies on museum practice. She has also collaborated on curatorial projects, including the exhibition Facing the Colonial Legacy in the Museum, which explores these themes through innovative participatory approach. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I trust that you hear me well.
We can see you, but not your presentation. Okay, perfect. Yeah, everything is okay. Yeah.
I will start. So, Andrea Villani for the presentation just before. I also just think that and what really possible. This presentation share with you.
There is a problem with the voice.
It's an intervention on now Santos Museum in Figueira da Foz, Portugal, and I'm going to talk to you about that and about behind it. So how we came to that. So, as it was said, I repeat. The project was called which is also the curator of this. So I will start by talking about the project smart. But before going to that, I also
Maria, can you hear us?
Within the context of the
Can you hear
project,
me?
these things that
No, we have the problem.
Of museums in Portugal, museums from the 19th century, but we look at the meaning as objects, right? Objects from collections, so scientific objects. And although this may seem like a very exclusive,
We can't hear your voice, so can you hear us? There is a problem. I think when she turned into the full screen, it started. Yeah, maybe you will try now. No, maybe this is about the headphones. Maybe you will use it. Without headphones. Oh, we can't hear you. No. No voice. Is it so? The problem is from home.
Maria, could you take off the headphones? Because maybe the problem is the microphone of the headphones.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay, let's check now with the presentation.
Okay, apologies, I couldn't understand that there was a... Okay, let's check now.
Could you restart the presentation because we haven't heard nothing about that? Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, now I think it's okay. Everything is good now?
No, yeah, thank you.
Yes, apologies, Okay, so I'm going to start. Once again, I'm sorry for not being there in person, and thank you so much to the organization and to Andrea Vigliani that preceded me for a very, very interesting presentation. So I want to share with you today 2 points. One is to talk to you about this exhibition, or better said, intervention in the ethnography room of the Municipal Museum of Figueira da Foz in Portugal, which is ongoing until the end of October, and to talk to you about the project that preceded this intervention. So, as it was said, I worked as a researcher with a scholarship in the project and was part of the curatorial team of this intervention that was coordinated by Elizabeth Pereira. So starting in this project, the Transmat project, I want to also start by saying, to talk about our point of departure, so how we looked at these things. I'm going to say things under commas that are in the ethnographic sections or collections of archaeology museums in Portugal, museums from the 19th century. This is what we looked in the project. So within this context of the history of the archaeology museum, these things that have many meanings and many names that we normally don't know from what is in the museum archive. They are objects, and they are scientific objects. So as we looked at these things as collections, as scientific objects, which may be exclusive, it also builds on to understand how knowledge production is made around these collections, and in the history of the museums, and to understand what collections are. Also, I want to situate a little bit our context. The research started in the end of 2020. This is a time, 1 year later, the ICOM Portugal publishes a report where they inquire museums about extra European collections. So if they had them, what they had, what was their characteristics. And many couldn't respond if they had or not, they didn't know, and they couldn't also characterize these collections. So this report from 2021 was showing that there's a huge lack of knowledge about collections, namely collections of colonial provenance in Portuguese museums. So this is our background when we are starting. And I share with you our website and some of the questions we started departing. So this project comes from a methodology and also a framework from the history of science, and it's a project from the University of Évora. Yes, that was looking at, as I said, archaeology museums from the 19th centuries and their collections, the ethnographic collections. We specifically look at two museums, the National Archaeology Museum in Lisbon, that was founded in 1893 by Leite de Vasconcelos, and this municipal museum, the Santos Rocha Municipal Museum, founded in 1894 by António dos Santos Rocha, in the city of Figueira da Foz. So when we were looking, so we wanted to understand then how these collections came to be, how did they end up in Portugal, when were they brought and by whom, why were they displaced from their place of origin, what role did they play in the museum collection at different stages, and what values or meanings have been assigned to them over time. So we are looking at the history within the museum. So today, these collections in the Santos Rocha Municipal Museum are held in the visitable storage, which is open since 2014. The image you can see on your left, and the exhibition room, the ethnography room, which until recently was what you can see on your right. So in the context of the project, and here are some of the results already of the provenance research we did. So we look at this, what Anna Turner calls the institutional bureaucracy, with the archives from the museum, but also newspapers, scientific magazines, and a lot related with colonial history. And we use the object biography also in our methodology. So some of the results, which is what I wanted to show you here. So to understand better what this collection is in both museums, and I would call attention for the graphic on the left side, which has you see these columns in two colors. The orange is the Municipal Museum of Santos Rocha in Figueira da Foz, and the green, the National Museum. So the first thing that we understood is that this is a collection that is relatively small between the two museums. We are talking about 2,000 objects. So it was something that that we were comfortable to look at more with more extent. And that surprisingly for us, the Municipal Museum has a larger collection. It had about 1,400 objects, while the National Museum had 6,000. This majority of the objects are of African came from Africa and were namely from Angola and Mozambique, and it was followed in the Municipal Museum by Timor. It was the third biggest provenance of objects, and then Brazil. And why is that so? Obviously, we are looking at collections that are built in the end of the 19th century, in the beginning of the 20th century, and these were previously colonized territories by Portugal. And then when we started to look even further in the years of incorporation of these objects, we see that they correspond with military campaigns that were done in these territories. So this was it was very evident, these relationships. In the matters of Brazil, it's also because particularly Figueira da Foz, the port was dealing with commerce with Brazil, and through these relationships, there was also a lot of objects coming. Yes, so on the graphic on the right, you can see I highlighted two years. 2 years specifically because this is related to what we were showing that was being displayed in the ethnographic room. So what we also, which I will actually go back more to the front of the presentation. So besides looking at the collection in these general matters, so where are the objects mainly, where did they come from, when did they get in the museum, we were looking at this history, the history of the museum. And one thing that was very important, of course, is this the scientific paradigm that is underlying this ethnographic collection building. Which is related with this methodology used in the archaeology of the 19th century in Europe, this comparison methodology that used a racialized and evolutionist perspective on culture and mankind. Santos Rocha, this is the pictures from the Municipal Museum in different points. The first picture on the left shows us the museum in the end, in exactly the first years, in the end of the 19th century. And the second picture shows it how it went afterwards, how it mutated from the first image until around the 50s. It stayed like that. And Santos Rocha, the founder of the museum, which is integrated in this scientific paradigm in Europe in the end of the 19th century, and from which he takes a lot of reference from Italian archaeology, Luigi Pigorini. So he's invested in building this museum in this with these configurations that we see. Then upon his death in 1910, the museum that went some modifications, and in the 40s they come with a new program renaming this room from the comparison room to the ethnography room. And in this stage, they separated the archaeology collections that in beginning were together with the ethnographic collections to another part of the museum, but maintain exactly the same structure of exposition and of classification of the objects exposed. Yes, okay, so I will keep going. So so I've been showing you a bit how we have undergoing the work. We do this provenance research to understand the overall of collection. We did this look into the scientific paradigms that are in the base of also the collection, and then as well, so certain contexts that appear very relevant and that are related with those years that I highlighted in the graphics. And in this image, you see three portraits. The first one on top, on the left, is of the founder of the museum, Santos Rocha. The one on the right of him, it's a photography of his scientific network in Portugal, and the scientific society founded, the Archaeology Society at work. And on the bottom is a relative of him, a military and colonial administrator called João dos Santos Pereira Jardim, that was also a member of the scientific society founded. He was at some point as well administrator of the port, the maritime port of Figueira da Foz, and it's the biggest collector is the biggest collector in this collection. We looked as well at who is making this collection. And it's people mainly related with the founder, Santos Rocha, and they participate in the cycles he relates to political, commercial, and familiar, scientific. And this military, this that you see in the bottom, João dos Santos Pereira Jardim, he's responsible for the incorporation of 260 objects, about 200 from Timor and 60 from Angola, which is what we actually see in display today in the ethnography room of the museum without this information. So this has been absent in the discourse of the museum of how the collection is made, right? So another layer that we work on is, so how did he acquire these collections? And the collection from Angola is the result of a plunder, the theft of all these 60 objects that are sacred entities, amongst other things. Some of which it's the ones you can see here on the right. And they are the product of a punitive military expedition that he led in the north of Angola in 1902 for revenge. This is what he says in his own words: to revenge the resistance of the local populations in acquiring that are refusing to participate in this exploitation of materials, namely timber, for the Portuguese. Yes, so this is, and I also have here on the further left this map of Angola, which is the representation of the military Portuguese. It's a political representation, so of course all these entanglements are part of collection making, of what collections are, but are often absent of the museum discourse when we visit the museum and when we visited this ethnography room. So it is in this context that this intervention comes in the end of the project, which was a bit complicated. The project, which was funded by the Scientific and Technology Foundation of Portugal, one of the requirements is in the end to make an exhibition. And we were working and planning on something. We had a project that 1 month before we opened couldn't follow through for a lot of questions, and we had to adapt. We worked very closely with the designer and architect that then came up with a device that consolidated our concerns, which is, and also work with the restrictions we were given. Something that was very important is what you see here in the first image on the left, which is the poster of the exhibition, which is a composition of these labels. Some were the original, and the labels through the years in the museum regarding this collection. And what we see there is how they, of course, how they reproduce the same things. So they reflect this kind of order the museum gives, right? And the ways it catalogs these collections and how it perpetuates the same narrative that is built in the 19th century in the beginning, and that is also inscribed in this very particular scientific paradigm. Right?
Maria, apologize to interrupt you, just 2 minutes left, sorry.
Right, I'm coming to the end. So we include in the exhibition all this information about the research, but mainly our main focus was to interact and to engage with the visitors. These photos I show you here are from the end of June. So and when it opened the exhibition, it seemed like nothing had been done because we only had used the glass of this of where the objects are within. So we didn't change. We used the ethnography room as a document, as the museography that was present as a document, that we interact with on the glass panels. So we introduce our parts of our research, and then we invite the public to intervene. And then this is what is very interesting, because the visitors, the visitors precisely talk about this. They start to question, okay, who do this? There's a lot of the question of ownership being called to. So how can museums own things that were stolen? We don't understand what these things are. What are their original names? And why is this history of Portugal a violent history of land and resources dispossession has been absent so far? So it allows us to have an engagement space, a space of engagement with the visitors and with the schools. So today, so these pictures, as I said, they are from the end of June. Today, this is even more full. So there's places we can no longer see also the collection. And the first thing, remember, the name of this intervention is Facing the Colonial Legacy in the Museum, and it's precisely this confluation of the past and the present, and these entanglements of knowledge production in the museum. And today, in many spaces, you can no longer see the objects, you see the visitor's critique, and it has become very interesting. Thank you, and apologies for the first parts.
Thank you very much. It's okay. Thank you. I would like to thank both speakers and apologize for interrupting, but we are really behind our timeline. So we have just a minute to pick up the questions, the one-to-one for each speaker. So if there is any questions, the floor is open for the discussion. And we will have a final discussion where all the speakers will be invited. No questions? Okay, so we will visit your museum, Andrea, tomorrow, and we will have the time also to discuss and open, which we couldn't do today. So I'm looking at Juliana. I know that we should finish this panel. I would like to thank once again. Yeah, do you want to say anything? I would like to thank and applaud both speakers. Thank you very much, and we will see each other. Maria, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ciao.
Buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning.
This panel is the panel related with heritage museums collections, the community's role. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Mário Antes. I came from Portugal. I'm ICOM Europe board member and also work in National Museum of Ancient Art in Lisbon and also teach in Lusófona University in Lisbon, more exactly in the Department of Museology in Cátedra UNESCO of Education and Museums. Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate all the organization, especially ICOM Europe, ICOM Italy and ICOM Africa, Arab, and all the other committees, because it's not easy to bring together professionals around the world. We have in this room museums professionals from several continents, not only Europe, but also Africa, and we have one colleague from Australia also. So it's very good to have and to bring all the people together, because we have the same problems, we share the same difficulties, and of course we are here to learn from each other and from our experiences as well. So when we talk about this panel, Heritage Museums and Collections, we think how there are several questions on our mind related with communities. How can communities participate? Should communities co-curate our exhibitions? Should or would communities have a key role in our museums? We believe so. And this panel is about that. We have 3 colleagues. One is here, the other are online. 3 different experiences from Senegal, from Cote d'Ivoire, and from Somalia to share with us, because museums have no borders, and we are here because we truly believe that we are building a better world through our museums, and we have to go out of our box, think outside the box, and try to figure how us as museums professionals could challenge the world and give voice to the communities, because as museum professionals, we are also members of these communities. So, without further delays, I'm going to present our first colleague, Mustafa Dia. He comes from Senegal, and is going to speak about the role of the communities, the role of the communities in development of the anti-colonial museums in Africa. Mustafa Dia is a heritage manager at Théodore Mondou Museum in Africa, in Dakar, in Senegal, and also a doctoral research at Ethnos Doctoral School. And he has a thesis related with space, society, culture. Also, we have a master's degree in history, prehistory, archaeology, and medieval history, and a professional master in arts and cultures. So, he has a long experience. He was a scholarship of French government for his doctoral research internship at University of Paris 8, and also participate in different international programs, such as British Academy International Writing Workshop, and is treasurer of ICOM Senegal since 2024, and also member of ICOM Sustain. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Je remercie.
Thank you. I would like to thank you, thank all the staff for the organization. I would like to thank ICOM Sustain for the engagement on sustainable development that I represent here today. I'm going to talk about the development of anti-colonial museum in Africa, and what are their roles. The museums in Africa started being colonial tools, and the first museums, like European museums, has been established as schools and churches, and both of them are well spread in Senegal. And here I would like to make you understand how the objects are useful to the society. The first one is the making process, and then the usability. We are talking about objects of the society that we use for communications, ceremonies. So objects that are useful that we have in our homes, but because of the colonization, they have been taken away. So we try to reintegrate them again. And the context of these objects is paradoxal because they have been taken and then we have reintegrated them. So it's important to understand the life cycle of these objects, so the importance they have because they represent an identity. In Senegal, the first museum experiences have been in Dakar, the main town. Here you can say the Museum Théodore Monod. And before that, they worked on research. Starting by 1961, they replaced it by the Ethnographic Museum, and they created all of these museums in colonial buildings. And starting by that, we can see that they created borders because the buildings represent the identity and the respect of the colonizers. So these buildings have been reinvented and they became museum. Starting in 1961, we are talking about post-colonial museums. They wanted to show that Africa has a living culture because in European museums there are static objects. Or state objects. But the main goal of the post-colonial museum is that of showing the continuity and the willingness to build dynamic museums in order to show the link, the relation with the European culture. And in 1975, they created this dynamic museum of Dakar that was a former military building, and it was reinvented as museum in order to show all the Senegal populations. So there is the exhibition of the Museum of Dakar in 1945, and then later the exhibition of the Museum Théodore Monod. As you can see, the Senegal public is represented by tourists. So this could lead us to start the reflections, and we are always talking about reuse, recycle the buildings. This is the example, and they are sites inherited by the colonial. Why should we develop these kind of museums? Because some museums have their roots in Africa, museums that can reflect the African culture. And here I added some quotes. For example, that of Aimé Césaire, that say that museums are nothing themselves alone. Or Stanislas says that museums itself means nothing. Or Alpha Omar in 1983, he says that we need to kill the Western model of museum in Africa. And also Kizerbo Joseph in 1992 says that we have to develop ourselves in our museums, and we have to try to valorize our heritage through some conservation practices that society's museum have, because African culture is a living culture, so that we give the possibility to cultures and communities to expose and exhibit their culture. So starting by that, we chose to give importance to diversity and to the elements that justified or could justify the creation of a community museum, because culture is a living element that has to be passed to future generation. You can see some images of open air museums that show how much our cultures are preserved years after years. In the bottom, you can see all the tools that are a symbol, because they make understand our traditions, and we put them under the trees, and thanks to this tool we collect objects and they show our tradition. You can also see the different types of materials we use and the reincarnation of the spirit throughout folkloristic ceremonies that enable us to show our attachment to the culture and a culture that that is still alive. This is for the Senegal, and these are some practices that show how the community use some tools that could be in contrast with modern museums, because modern museums are isolated and they are organized and managed by the institution and the state. So universities should enter in the museums, and thanks to these resources, we try to participate in the development of these communities and cultural heritage. And why do we do that? Because, for example, in Casamas, we have holy forests that we protect with cultural tools, and nobody can enter in those areas. Entering in those holy forests is forbidden. And in that case, too, there are ceremonies every year. But what is the role of communitarist museum in Africa? Above all, we protect the cultural heritage. And we can talk about the engagement of society that is a viewer of the cultural practices and traditions. Since in this way we can show the attachment of the museum to society. So the first step is that of adapting buildings and give them another use. And this is an essential element that encourage society to create these museums. There are also myths that are part of the intangible tradition that we want to pass throughout generation. Then there is the museum as a reflection of the living traditions. And it reflects our traditions. So the cultural heritage is collocated within our practices, and it guarantees, and because the community is active in the cultural mediation. There are also other initiatives enabling to transform a museum in collective memory guardians from an historical point of view. For example, in Senegal, we were touched by colonization, but universities and schools, there we often study history concerning the first contact with European population or Arab populations. and the cultural heritage has been looted in other European museums. So these museums can play an important role as a guardian of collective memory of our tradition, also concerning the craftsmanship. There are some memorials too. There is a community called Morit in Senegal that thought about a conception of a museum. It is a new conception. This is the map of the museums. The first museums started from the colonial cities like Dakar, started by 1980s with the contribution of the community. There are different museums that are spread in, for example, regional or community museums. Here you can see the museums showing the openness of African communities and their practices. There is the Black Civilization Museum in Dakar, open since 2018, that shows the relationships towards globalization. And soon there will also be the International Museum of Vodun that is under construction with the main goal of giving value to culture and in order to show our communities and traditions and to show how Africans tries to preserve their cultural heritage and how we can have a dialogue with the others. It is a symbol of the sustainable development of African Museum. It is a project of Senegal and Gayemeke that enables us to valorize our traditions. And Gayemeke is a place where these materials are produced and where they keep doing it. So the same architecture is a symbol of how this craftsmanship resists to globalization, and has a display showcase museum. In order to conclude, I would like to say that these discussions are useful because I think that the young African people need to be informed, and we need hope. And why? Because our main goal is integrate the museums, and there is also the issue of the fact that in Africa the development is only concentrated in the main cities, and the rural areas are far away. So there are not enough places for young people, and I think that it is essential to find mechanism of development in the cultural heritage restoration, and we need experts of the sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your inspiring presentation. Our colleague from Senegal shows a lot of things, raised some very important questions. Museums are not only the places for keeping the collections and our collective memory, but also places for communities' participation. And in the end, it shows some of the difficulties that we have bringing young people to the museums and the important role of the museums, because museums are, as our colleague said, especially on cities, but also the importance of small museums to bring persons to that small isolated museums, community museums, eco-museums and so on, in order to bring together people and his own traditions. So we have 2 more presentations. I ask some with technical support if you have our colleagues online or not. They are not online? Okay. 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 Unfortunately, our colleague Jerome Evano from Cora Museum have some technical problems. He cannot join us. I'm just asking if the third presentation, Mustafa Hussein from Somalia, is online. I don't know. No, also not online. Well, good news. We are going to lunch earlier. Okay. The other news. I give the floor to our colleagues to raise some questions because I think this matter about community museums and especially the role of communities in these questions of heritage is quite important. Our colleague shows a lot of examples of museums that are on Senegal, not only in Senegal, but we are trying to bring together this approach between persons, between people and our communities, of course, and the legacy and our heritage. So I ask if someone has some question or, okay, thank you. I think he's our colleague from Australia and our colleagues also. Okay, so if you have a microphone, okay, thank you so much for your participation. Going to join you.
Thank you very much. By way of introduction, my wife and I are from Australia. I'm an Aboriginal person from the Narragansett Nation, and I'm here to represent a number of Aboriginal tribes, both to make connections with people actually at this conference. We're at the beginning of starting our keeping places, which are small community-based museums, and we need expertise and knowledge and sharing of ideas to help us on our way. So we're at the very beginning, but we represent community, and I guess it's appropriate at this particular presentation to reflect that the presentation on Senegal so captures our thoughts in terms of what storytelling is. We use storytelling in our healing, and we use storytelling in our education. It's a fundamental strategy that we use. For Australians, we've got roughly 300 tribes, and we're all sovereign people, but none of us are recognised by our government, and there's no treaty, and our story is one of recapturing our identity and using any means we can to be able to do that. The way that we are thinking of doing it is exactly like having traditional presentations as in a building, etc. But because of the very nature of our culture, which is land-based and very much connected to country, the way we tell our stories is really on country, with country, outside, talking about the cultural aspects of water, trees, all that sort of thing. Every time we have some of our artefacts returned to us, it's an affirmation of our identity and a strengthening of our nation building. And I guess one of the things that we really want to do, and particularly after this presentation here, is to have dialogue with our African brothers and sisters about your storytelling and how that lines up with our storytelling, but also emphasising the healing component that comes with the recapturing of the stories and the strengthening of our identities. So I guess that's a comment, but if anybody or you would like to respond, that would be good.
Thank you so much. Our colleague from Australia raised a very important question. Of course, objects, material objects are important because they belong to someone, but also we cannot forget the power of oral tradition, immaterial, the power of storytelling. The objects are important because they belong to real people and tell us histories. So I think it's a very good question. If you want some comments, okay? And then I will give the floor to our colleagues to raise more questions. Thank you.
Je pense que c'est intéressant. On peut déjà présenter.
I think that is interesting. We are lucky because there is a part of the community that will keep working on that in order to tell identity elements. And I think that we African communities, we have already worked on that. We will see what good practices could be used in these communities. Thank you.
Next question, please.
Mario?
Yeah. Juliana.
Yes, I think it's a pity that your panel is so short. If you have the abstract of Ivano and Hussein, I think you can read in order to know which would be the arguments to be treated in the panel.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so before that, Juliana, if you don't mind, I give the floor to our colleagues to make more questions, and then I read the both abstracts. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I absolutely love that you are engaging communities, even in the design of new museums. Is there any process you're following in this design process? Because architectural civil works design is enormous and it is political, and in public sector, obviously, it's extremely lengthy. So how then are you engaging the communities for this significant process in designing the... And could you please, when you're talking about it, could we go back to that second last slide? It was so beautiful. Thank you.
For our colleague? Yes.
Okay. Tu peux répondre bien. Je réponds directement à la question.
Yes, please.
Ok, parce que là...
We have an open-minded chairman that gives importance to museum. And me, as a young actor, I tried to propose African museums with a different conception and idea. And so I try to put in contact different communities so that museums are more dynamic and that are well-connected centers with society. There is so much work to do, obviously. Well, I think that is an element of the culture that are of the tangible cultural heritage. And all this is part of a territorial policy, because if we put everything in the main city, Dakar, because we know that the population is not sensitive to what is happening, I think that the museums are largely have a great part of the public that is composed by tourists. And I think that we should find a better way to attract the local communities and populations. Our population has not the means to develop. And I think that it is one of the reasons of the problems of the society. Yes, I would like to ask a question.
New technologies. We have a question online, so I give the floor for the persons in the room, and then we're going to read the question online also for our colleague can answer. Okay, thank you.
Oui, j'ai une
I have a question. Thank you for your presentation. I would like to know whether the community museums you are talking about are classical museums with an architecture in a specific place, or are they living museums that do not answer directly to the classical logics of museums we are used to? They are not classical museums, but museums that have been built by community. And there are museums that are beyond the walls. They are valorized in their own context. We have not many visitors, and it is part of the process of valorization of the cultural heritage. And there are not preservation rules specific for this situation, but there are elements in order to preserve and protect this kind of art, the protection of nature and of the local communities. And the local communities worship nature, ancestors, and in the last years, we are developing the eco museums, and we use traditional arts and objects that are relocated in a new context. And this enables us to allow visitors to understand what is behind this story. We name them, we give them an origin, a provenance. Unfortunately, there are some information that we do not have at the moment. So there is a lack of information concerning some specific objects, a lack of identity. So for us, in giving value to this tangible culture heritage is important.
Online? Okay, if you don't mind, could you read the question online? Yes, you, if you don't mind. Okay, thank you so much.
Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everyone. I have a technical question. The creation of a community museum, can it be considered as a form of conservation and preservation? And which are the main challenges?
C'est ça, je pense que ça va faire plaisir à Naomi parce que la
There were techniques of preservation that are led by experts and technicians, but I think that there is staff that work on the development of preservation of the cultural heritage, and I think that this is useful, and I think that I should be side by side with the staff to answer better to this question. I'm honest.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
OK, merci pour.
Thank you for your question. concerning your question, this question is linked to museum, and starting by the quotes you made, you talked about Western models of museum. I would like to explain what we have been saying. How can we translate this Western model? I think that we have not reached the point of understanding these aspects. And concerning what have been said concerning the community museum, I think that when we talk about museum, we talk about a museum, and we do not have to find the way of working, because we have to involve the institution in order to work better. And if we want to give the responsibility to some institution, is okay. But I think that we can agree on the fact that populations are interested on this museum, because people go to museums and say that is part of our daily life. And you should keep saying, yes, keep visiting the museum. This way of behaving, saying that museum have not a great number of visitors, maybe it's not the best museum, because museums are a place of where we have the possibility to discover, we can give and receive at the same time. So we must try to attract visitors. This is my point of view. This not makes sense according to me, because every population, according to me, is curious and wants to know their community and their population. And if we allow to other communities to discover, to get to know museums and the history behind them, that could improve the dialogue between the communities. And I would like to know, this new international community, how were you be able to interact with it, and which are the ideas concerning the museum development? Because some communities do not know the development step by step, and how this community can, and how can this community participate to all of that. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup pour la...
Thank you for your intervention. These are identitary museums that reflect society. So why you're asking me why African people do not go to museums? Because in a large part, they are museums that are not known by people and by the local communities. Within these museums, we can find very important objects. This enables the society to understand better the conservation, preservation, and restitution. And sometimes we also talk about burning these objects. We used to making them, to use them. And then there are preservation spaces, specialized and specific. We said that before the arrival of European population, there were many museums. As a matter of fact, in Senegal, we have many collections of collectors And all the owners of these collectors use them for ceremonies. And right now, these objects have owners and collectors. I think that is interesting what you have just said. And if it was possible to increase the number of museums and increase the number of the objects collected within the museums, we also could open the borders in order to allow the circulation of these objects across all Africa. And in that way, we could present our continent. But if we fail on this collaboration with other museums, unfortunately, we will not be able to do that. So right now, we are trying to develop the relationship between the museums, giving importance to communities, because community manages and preserves cultures in synergy with the protection of nature. So this is why we have to give importance to the climate aspects and try to keep the population in these places so that they could work on the preservation of the environment, and above all, be open to globalization. Are there any questions?
Mine is more of just a comment, and first to thank Mohamed for that nice, lovely presentation, especially of community museums. And I must say, coming from Zambia, that I relate with the issue of community museums. What we have seen in the last few years in my country is many communities in the rural areas asking to have their own museums so that they can tell their own stories in that particular museum. And the National Museums Board of Zambia has been giving technical support to many different communities to come up with museums. And just a rider on what Caroline said regarding the designs, one of the museums up north of the country that wants to come up with a museum, when we last went there, we did not go as experts. We went there to listen and to learn from them regarding what they wanted to do. And when it came to the designs, we said to them, it's not us to decide. You must decide. It is your institution. It is your museum. What is it that you would like to have? What kind of museum would you like to see? And they said to us, the most important thing for us as a people, or the Lunda people, is the hammock, which we carry our traditional leader when going elsewhere and doing traditional ceremony. And they decided our museum would like to see it in the design of a hammock where our chief sits on. So we, as museum professionals, then give only technical support of what they must think through regarding what a museum should be, but they decide themselves what story they want to see in this particular museum. And in this particular way, when they get involved as communities in development of the museum, then there is a sense of ownership of this particular institution. The stories that are told in there are their own stories, and because they can see and relate with the institution, then we don't have, or we overcome the challenge of people not coming or local people not coming to these institutions. Why they do not come is mostly they consider these institutions as foreign institutions, foreign concepts. They're built in the city centers, in private areas, huge, intimidating for the local communities, and they don't see themselves there. And the narratives that are told there are not their own narratives, are narratives that demean them sometimes or most times. But if we can have this bottom-up approach, especially for communities that are far in the rural areas, indigenous people getting involved in making up or coming up or developing these particular institutions, then we start winning and we change the museology from the way it has been. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Terry, and for sharing also your experience in Zambia. And I think it's very transversal because we are dealing with the same situations with small museums in rural areas and low density population also in Europe and around other parts around the world. So if you want to comment on Terry.
C'est intéressant. Je pense que Terry, on a...
Well, I think we should create specific sessions and debates, and that's what you are doing in your country. Same applies to Benin. So in Africa, this kind of approach is being developed, and I think this panel will enable us to exchange knowledge as well as build models to support the needs of museums in today's world.
ICOM Europe, I very much agree with the last point, because I think in European museums, see the classical concepts of museums, we are very well aware how to work with objects, to tell our stories, our history with the objects we have in our collection. And I think we have less experience in how to address the intangible heritage, the intangible stories and tradition that we want to communicate. In Austrian rural areas, we have small museums. We call them regional museums because they're located in the small villages, and it's the same thing you are telling. It's mostly addressing the history of the rural communities and their backgrounds, their religion or farming structures and so on. But I think it would be important for us together to develop means how to represent the intangible heritage. Maybe it's not so much about just how the communities kind of pick their stories, but to say what intangible heritage is really important for us and how can we develop that with the different views, because communities are not coherent in a lot of ways. We have also the modern topics of feminism and how are we relating maybe to tribal structures or modern concerns that we want to address, but we have certain topics like climate change, sustainability, the UN SDGs, how do we address colonialism and past, and how do we address maybe modern colonialism that is coming from now other countries to Africa or different societies. So it would be maybe a concept that ICOM should address with working groups or conferences to together, as also the colleague from Australia said, it's a topic that has to be addressed worldwide and to develop together in the frame of ICOM the possibilities of intangible heritage and how we can present that in a museum context. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do you want to comment? Okay. Small comment.
I think it's quite interesting what you said. I think we should rely on what we call ambassadors to work on these objectives. We should have living objects that are part of Africa. And through these museums, we want to make sure that objects are presented in a different manner in order to enhance the intangible assets, because sometimes the reproduction of a specific layout, while respecting the same European standards, we would betray our culture. We have a very different standards. We have something different in Africa. We are trying to conceive new paradigms for our museums, which should become living centers, giving the possibility to users to experience a different transformation.
From the room, if you don't mind, please, go ahead.
Oui, je ne sais pas si c'est une...
I think it's more a comment than a question. I would like to reflect on what we've just heard. I think we should be interested in what the audience feels when it visits the African museums in Cambodia. I was very astonished by the reactions, and I think we will always have an audience made by students, of course, scholars, but also tourists. I think most of our visitors are represented by scholars, and we fail to involve other parts of the society. We should try and involve them. For us, museums are a particular situation. We dress very formally, very elegantly when we want to visit a museum. It's a very specific moment in our life. We dress up and we go to a museum. So it is important to properly present the products we show, and we should do it in an extraordinary manner to involve visitors, to attract visitors. So we should create a dialogue to draw visitors' attention. We shouldn't focus on immovable objects. We should focus on feelings, the real nature of our exhibition, because people want to feel, they want to hear stories, they are curious about the origins, the provenance of the objects. So I think we should focus on this aspect. For example, in Benin, we have different opinions, for sure, but as you already know, Mali launched cultural banks to deal with the military situation that we are facing, and several objects have gone missing. Other countries are acting in the same manner, and we are following these processes. In Cameroon, for instance, it is very important to create a space. And this space was created by working with professionals. In the West Cameroon, this system works. So in my opinion, it is really important to start dialoguing and start important relationships. In that area, an important building caught fire. I went there. I visited it. I saw fire extinguishers, but I realized nobody used them, so I understood the problem. The manager was there, but still that fire was a disaster. So we need to give to these people tools. We need to train these people, the operators, for them to be able to deal with emergencies. Nobody took the responsibility of what had happened. So we had extraordinary meetings to understand who was responsible for what had happened. So in my opinion, it is important to have a code of ethics to use. Maybe I was too long, but this situation created a project for a financial bank, which is unusual. How does it work? So we have a big ceremony, and people from all over the world join the event, friends, colleagues. And why am I saying this? Because I want to reiterate that going to a museum must represent an important moment for us. And we have created pavilions to have museums all over our territory. I would like to thank you, but I would like to reflect upon the dynamic nature of museums, which should be guaranteed while looking at the importance of attracting visitors for them to understand the real meaning.
Vous savez, le musée ici, c'est un espace, c'est tout le temps contemplatif.
As you know, museums are important spaces. In museums, you're generally silent, but in African museums, things work differently. You can hear noises, actually. You stand and you comment on that object. And somehow you become an active part of the museum. And I think this could be a positive approach to get in touch with the object. And this is a great difference compared with the Western society. And I think it could be vital to change the approach. Thank you.
News because ICOM family is about inclusion, and I think there is now conditions to have Jerome Evano online for making the presentation. Jerome is a project manager and research coordinator, and also member of and curator of Cora Museum. So if Jerome is online, we would like to hear your presentation. Go ahead, please.
Vous m'entendez? Est-ce que quelqu'un peut me répondre?
Yes, we are listening to you.
OK.
S'il vous plaît, you...
Et donc ça pourrait couper. Donc moi, je m'appelle Jérôme et je suis l'initiateur.
My name is Jerome, and I am the initiator as well as the collector of Cora Museum, which is located in a very small village. I have created this museum out of passion. I do not belong to the museum world. I did it out of passion and because I play kora. Kora is a musical instrument. Can you hear me? Can I continue? Of course, you may. So Unfortunately, we cannot hear the speaker due to technical issues, and therefore we cannot translate.
De la plage, le musée propose des concerts.
So the museum proposed concerts, and I really love what African museums represent, and this is what I've tried to share by means of this museum I've created. Still technical issues, we cannot translate, unfortunately.
La majorité, vous m'entendez toujours?
Non.
Pas du tout.
Bon, je continue. Vous m'entendez pas? Je vais continuer. J'espère que ça.
Okay, I'm going to continue. I hope you can hear me. So, as I was saying, most of the historical artifacts in the museum were found in Europe and in Western countries, and were then transferred to the African countries through the intermediaries. And this is something I did personally. I think that decolonization of museums could be very important for us, and for this reason, I proposed a project on this aspect. What can I tell you? We have no funding. We have approximately 300, 500 visitors per year, half of which comes from local community, neighboring local communities. We have many tourist expats mainly living in this area, and we've tried to collaborate with other museums to share artifacts as well as music. So what else can I rapidly tell you?
Presentation, please, because we are dealing with some problems with the time, and we have several panels after this. Okay, if you can conclude now, thank you very much.
So I would like to thank ICOM for organizing this conference, and I'm done with the presentation.
Jerome, it was a pleasure. Okay, now for concluding and finally have lunch, just because ICOM is about inclusion, I will just read the abstract of the lecture of Mustafa Hussein. Mustafa Hussein is the head of collection and cataloging of Somaliland National Museum. He's a skilled cultural heritage specialist and brings significant expertise in museum curation. Of course, through this leadership, the Somalian National Museum has become a critical institution in the region, contributing for the broader conversation on museums, innovation, and post-colonial identity reconstruction. So the abstract is about reclaiming the past, rebuilding identity, the role of Somaliland National Museum in post-colonial heritage preservation. The Somaliland National Museum, located in the heart of Arkesia, serves not only for the cultural institution, but also as a symbol of the resilience and the reclamation of identity. Despite facing challenges such as the lack of international recognition and limited institutional support, the museum has become a beacon for cultural continuity and collective memory, offering a space where history and identity of Somaliland can be reclaimed and celebrated. This presentation examines the difficulty faced in the building of heritage institution without the colonial era collections, often found in many Western museums. With this absence, the Somaliland National Museum has had the opportunity to create an indigenous approach to the museology, rooted in local traditions and realities of region. Through his experience at the museum, he discussed the community involvement and the youth engagement as a crucial part of empowering people, and the works continue in the sense of a national pride of solidarity. This paper also explores the museum activity's contribution to the global movement of decolonization museums, focusing on the unique challenge of operating in a not recognized state. The museum community-driven approach ensures that the local populations are engaged with the documentation and curation of their own heritage, creating a narrative that reflects their lived experience. As a key aspect of this work is the cataloging traditions of artifacts and documentation of oral histories, which are essential for the reconstruction of a national history. Okay, thank you so much in the name of Mustafa Hussein. Well, it was a challenge, but also very grateful to moderate this panel, and we have the opportunity to have conversation and share experience during the lunch. So thank you everybody for being here. Thank you. And thank you online also.